already famous in India and across the world as an expert in mining and underground technology, safety, also fire safety. So we are very excited to speak to you on behalf of bauma CONEXPO India. I want to extend a very warm welcome to you and express gratitude for joining us in this conversation.
Thank you very much for inviting me into the conversation.
I have to say that I love your office and all these little pieces of technology around. It is very inspirational for me as an interviewer and for our thousands of viewers who will watch this interview.
Oh, now you've got me scared. So I am not that guy who has the organised desk with everything in its place and no clutter. I am completely the opposite. I surround myself with everything at the same time. So yes, I have a very
do you draw
office.
Some inspiration from these little pieces of technology? What is the role of these things? What is its importance in your life?
So for me, little basically toys remind me of the curiosity of learning, and they remind me that I don't know everything, and they keep me young and excited. So actually, you know, I didn't do this specially for the interview. These are just my toys. I've got rescue toys from the series Thunderbirds, which began in 1964, which includes a tunnel boring machine, which I think is just wonderful. So that's it's my tunnel rescue Thunderbirds from 1964. So
wow.
That's 60 years ago. So it reminds me of the passion for learning and the excitement of learning. Compare it with a much more contemporary transformer, complete with an arm for doing excavation. And this also impresses me because, again, it's got that childish energy, a new sort of take on underground, in this case transformers, so I like that.
Wonderful.
I've got, anyway, all sorts of toys and things there.
You are a expert in tunneling safety for all these decades, and you have seen firsthand, up close and personal, how technology has evolved, perhaps from your days in university to your days today rescuing people in various parts of the world. So how has technology changed over the course of your career?
There's been an extraordinary change in technology. I think the big shift has gone from muscles to brains. So in the beginning, you had to be very strong to do the underground excavation. So it was very much, I think, a male-dominated and also a big tough. So 40 years ago, for underground construction, the emphasis was on muscles and less on brain. So it was a battle between the sort of human being and a mountain, or in a mine, or wherever it was. And I think over the 40 years, seen this incredible evolution, both of the conceptual framework for underground construction, the technology that allows a human being to do better construction, so less muscles, more machine, and also a more intellectual approach to it as well. So there are a whole lot of tools available to us now that incredibly reduce the risk of underground construction. So the toolkit for safe, reliable, resilient, sustainable underground construction has changed enormously over 40 years. What hasn't changed is stupidity is still stupidity, laziness is still laziness, doing a bad job is still doing a bad job. So while the tools may have changed, we as human beings still have a knack of stuffing things up. So that's the one thing that stayed the same. But what an amazing 40 years it's been. And I'm so excited to have been alive and doing what I do over that 40-year period.
emphasize a lot on listening to the mountain, on your, of course, your personal passion with rocks and geology and structures, underground structures. How would you say is human experience even more relevant, experience and intuition even more relevant today in the age of AI or IoT or whatever it may be?
Now that is such an awesome question, because it seems like a contradiction. On the one hand, I'm a scientist engineer and I'm talking about the great advances in technology, and yet, as you say, I listen to the mountain. And there lies perhaps the most important message that I have, and that is, despite how clever we are with our technology, and despite how good our modelling is, and despite everything else, in the end, we have to be a little humble when we're building underground, because even at this point in human development, the mountain is so much more powerful than us. And if we're not in harmony with the underground, we will die. Like, it's just, and I'm sad to say, but from my experience, that's just what happens, because we have to find some balance or harmony with nature. And so, yes, when I was there in Uttarakhand, strange as it might be, I resorted to some of the very first sets of skills that I was taught as a junior geology mining engineer, geotech engineer. Well, actually geologist, it was mining geologist is what I was. And the miners always taught me, listen to the mountain. Just listen to it. So don't be so arrogant that you think you know best. Be like a doctor with a patient. Be sensitive to what's happening around, and that's what I did in Uttarakhand. And I did get some rather strange comments, because there were colleagues of mine who know me in my more sciencey engineering capacity who were a bit shocked to find me listening to a mountain, kneeling at a temple, being very sensitive to what was happening. But I think that's the hallmark of a 21st century professional. It's not just having the tools of this century, but also having the humility to recognise we need to find a balance, a harmony with nature. And so that's what I was doing.
Coming to the incident of the Uttarakhand rescue, we know the basics, the 41 men trapped for 17 days in this Himalayan tunnel. But Arnold, we want to know from you your first thoughts when everybody blew into a panic. How did you approach this? What were your first thoughts? Were you scared? And how did you manage to be optimistic and spread this optimism and hope?
Well, it's interesting, because I think you've really hit the nail on the head, the nub of it. What did Arnold do? And I think I brought optimism, and I think I brought calm. And when I was first, when I was on my way, actually, so when I was flying there, I was busy researching what was going on. And what's not known, and in fact, I think you're the first person to ask me a question like this, what wasn't known is, years ago, I'd been flown to the Terry Dam project. There was a big cavity there, and I was asked to give some advice on the cavity, and it was collapsing. And the reality was I didn't have a clue. And so I'd been flown all the way to look at part of your Himalayas, and as a much younger man, discovered my humility, because the forces and the sheer enormity of the convergence that I observed in the cavity, something I'd never seen before in my life. So here I was flying back again, perhaps 20 years later. And so I'd already been taught a lesson, right? And my lesson was be humble.
In the Himalayas.
Yeah, because I'd been up to the Terry Dam project in the order of 20 years before. It might be 15 years before, but certainly when I had no grey hair and I was much younger and more arrogant. And so that arrogance was kicked out of me 15 or 20 years before, when I saw in the Himalayas the sort of movement and convergence that I'd never experienced in my life anywhere else on the planet. So when I was flying there this time, I was already humble because I'd learned my lesson once before. And I was busy doing all the research I could, and I saw some of the news clips of the local priests believing that the had been disturbed and angered because of the destruction of the little temple at the portal of the tunnel. And what might not be known in India, but the whole world, we have little temples outside our tunnels. It's just different gods. But my whole career, we always have little temples because all of us who work underground are a little humble because we know we can die each time we go in. So we bow down. So when I saw that the project had demolished the little temple, and that next day there'd been the collapse, and that the priests were unhappy, I was like, okay, well, this little pink man's going to be bowing down at the temple when he turns up, because I need all the help I can get. And I had a feeling that if we could be calm, we would be able to perform the rescue, and that our greatest enemy was ourselves. And over the years, I've seen victory taken just because of emotion, ego, crazy behaviour, dare I say it, man behaviour. Often the men are the worst. They get a bit frightened and then they become very aggressive and they just can't help it. So I just felt that if we could be calm, and if we could imagine the future of 41 men home safe, and if we could just be steady and reasonable and not just hold that mindset, we could do it. Things were pretty grim when I arrived, and the auger machine that had been used had blown up. There'd been an earthquake, and so there'd been more collapse. In fact, I think everything had failed. So by the time I turned up, people were a bit depressed, and I think I couldn't have come at a better time, really. So you have me in my orange clothes, land in a helicopter, this pink guy turning up. How am I going to behave? And I don't behave as expected. I go and bow down at the temple. And I didn't know everyone was watching me. I didn't know there was like 140 Indian primetime television channels all on the other mountain all filming me. I was just doing the right thing. And it somehow seemed to make a difference. And the warmth, the calm, that sort of very almost friendly. Like I can't, even when I look back, I think, Arnold, you're looking so, how are you so relaxed? I'm even looking at myself saying, how am I so relaxed? But I had to be so relaxed.
The Uttarakhand tunnel is one of many projects in India, but you have seen projects all over the world. And here in India, but everywhere, we believe that tunnel projects and infrastructure projects improve the lives of people. So what is your message now that you have seen these projects up close and personal? What is your message to the people building these projects or leading the operations of these projects? How should they approach it with perhaps a bit of your humility, but also more on a practical side?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of lessons to be learned with what happened up there, and I've been working closely with the government since, also as a volunteer. So not, I was there as a volunteer. I didn't come with some magical contract. I just was asked to come. And the sorts of things that we're looking at are, should we really award a contract to the cheapest bidder? What if the ground conditions aren't as expected? Can we make it easier to change the design? How do we make sure that the people who are building the tunnel have the skills that are needed to build it safely for themselves and for future users. How do we check? What's our sort of third-party audit check to make sure that everything's going well? Because I'm absolutely sure that putting the tunnels there is an awesome project. I mean, it's linking, you've got the four most sacred temples. I've had either the fortune or misfortune of driving across the mountains on the conventional road, which was totally terrifying for me each time I did it, with the cliffs and all the buses that have obviously fallen over and killed their occupants, and the landslides and all the rest of it. So for me, putting the tunnels in makes great sense. But just a little more humility, a little bit more attention to detail. And, you know, India is emerging now as one of the world's superpowers. Depends who you talk to, when they'll be at, you know, top of the pack. But it's, the country's on the way. So it's time to reflect that in the way this major infrastructure is delivered. So not just a focus on how much infrastructure can we build for a certain number of I'm just remembering how you say lakh. Is it lakh? How many lakh?
Lakhs.
Yeah,
lakhs
yeah,
of people.
Yeah. So not just how much can we do for a certain amount of money, but also how do we establish a minimum standard of quality? And I think that's the natural next step.
Thank you, Arnold, for those thought-provoking questions. I've made a list of them that people building projects and even citizens who are excited about these projects, who fund these projects with their public funds. These are the questions we should keep at the back of our mind, and not just the quantity of infrastructure, but the quality. Thank you for that. Taking a cue from your emphasis on quality and safety, what do you expect to see in terms of technology? How can technology cooperate better with us in terms of, the technical aspects, but how can technology perform in these extreme climatic altitude conditions? In Uttarakhand, some of it broke down, but in many other parts of India, in the Ladakh Valley, at these places, we use equipment to build at high altitudes, sub-zero temperatures. So what are your expectations when people build machines for complex projects? What should they keep in mind?
Well, I think, firstly, I don't think the conditions were so extreme that you couldn't use machines in Uttarakhand. I think the issue there was the machines that were being used for the rescue weren't appropriate. So we broke them. So it'd be like trying to use a spoon to cut something as if it was a knife. So that it's just in an emergency, you use what you've got and make the best of what you've got. I think in the very high altitudes, one of the big issues there is not so much the performance of the machines, but the performance of the people. So interestingly, we get back to the human problems. So freezing or not freezing isn't such a problem for a machine, because we can build machines to deal with that. But a frozen person is not much good. And a person who's suffering from, for example, low levels of oxygen because of the low partial pressure of oxygen at altitude means that they're not thinking correctly. It means that you're prone to injuries like your fingers freezing and falling off, and all headaches and heart attacks and all that sort of thing. So I think what we're going to see is that India's managed to get itself to the moon, like, well done. So I don't think developing equipment to excavate in the extreme conditions in the Himalayas is at all a big stretch for India. Frankly, I think you can do anything technically, but I'd be much more worried about the humans and how you protect your people. And I think that's part of the journey for India as a country. From my point of view as an observer, I was so amazed that such an effort was made for 41 simple, poor men from some of the poorest parts of India to rescue them. I mean, is that not awesome? That is not India of 50 years ago. That's India this century. And that for me is an emerging superpower now sort of putting its arms around its people and saying, we care for all of you. And I think that's what we're going to see up in the high altitude areas of the Himalayas as well. And the machines, you can just do that. I'm confident. I'm just so confident you can. As I say, you got to the moon. I reckon you can burrow through the Himalayas.
What are a couple of machines? You can build machines.
Absolutely.
Great. And finally, Arnold, coming to bauma CONEXPO India, this is one of, as we've shared with you earlier, one of India's largest trade fairs for equipment and the infrastructure industry, the buyers and sellers of machinery. So we're expecting many international participants, infrastructure builders from all the nooks and corners of India. So we're very excited and looking forward to your participation. What is your message to these people, visitors who will come, from the safety but also the sustainability of projects? How can we respect more, of course, the mountains, but also things like carbon emissions from our machines, the sustainability, mining sustainability, emissions from project sites? How can we be more mindful of that?
Yeah, so it's really the question of the moment. It really starts right back at the beginning about how contracts are set up. I know that sounds odd, but there needs to be a framework in place that rewards people for innovation, for doing things that are special, for new products. And that gets back to my original observation about giving contracts to the lowest bidder. Maybe that's not the way to go in terms of delivering more sustainable infrastructure. So, for example, there are now different sorts of concrete which are low carbon, but they might not be as cheap as traditional concrete. So, as a client, you would want a client to acknowledge that. So that's permitted. With the machinery, you've got an amazing ecosystem within India for the production of just about everything. You're one of the few company or country, doesn't matter which way I say it, but you can produce almost everything in India for your major heavy equipment. So, for example, if sustainability in steel is an issue, there are options for low carbon steel, just like there are options for low carbon concrete. In the design, with good design, you can optimize your use of materials. And Indian engineers are famous throughout the world for their modelling capabilities, because very numerate, very good in three-dimensional analysis. So you want to keep those good engineers home, stop them going overseas. So, creating an environment where they're there. So I think there's enormous opportunities. And also, I think what's not to forget is how much more efficient your economy becomes with this connective infrastructure. So the net effect of, for example, putting a tunnel in is that the journey time from A to B is substantially less. And so that in itself reduces the footprint of normal everyday activities. So if I want to be a pilgrim this month, my carbon footprint will be a lot less if I travel through a tunnel, and it will be for millions of pilgrims forever, essentially. So the sustainability dimension is partly populated just by the improvements to the efficiency and effectiveness of the network for transport. So I see it as a sort of a web of interconnected things. But having said all of that, I just love the Himalayas. When I was up in the forest, I remember walking, we'd had to cut a little track to try and rescue the men from above with a vertical shaft. And I remember going along and touching the roots of the trees because we had to cut some erodium. And I was literally touching them and going, sorry, sorry, because they're just beautiful. And I can still remember it was almost like diamonds, coming out of the roots, like they were bleeding, like bleeding little diamonds. And it really struck me about what a beautiful place it is. So while on the one hand, I really see the value of the infrastructure and its impact and positive impact on India as a nation. At the same time, I'm in love with your mountains and your forests. So that harmony, and the harmony I was looking for even in the rescue, I think is just so important.
Thank you, Arnold. You have really infected us with your optimism, but your honesty of this conflict of development versus your love for mountains, the forests, and nature. So thank you for this frank, open conversation.